real value added for the accommodation and food service activities industry contracted by an estimated 12.2%, reflecting a decline in stopover arrivals. Preliminary data on stopover arrivals for April to May 2026 stood at 382,745 visitors, down 19.6% compared with the similar months of 2025. Preliminary visitor expenditure for April to May 2026 fell by 17% to US $578 million compared with the similar period of 2025. Looking at the employment update. Regarding the employment outturn, Statin has released an update on the labor force survey for April 2026. As such, we will not present a detailed report on this area. For April 2026, the unemployment rate was 3.7%, up 0.4 percentage point relative to April 2025. Youth unemployment increased by 1.6 percentage points to 11.7%. The unemployed labor force also increased by 5,000 to 55,000 persons relative to April 2025. The number of persons employed decreased by 25,700 persons to 1,418,800 relative to April 2025. Male employment fell by 8,500 to 761,000 persons, while female employment decreased by 17,000 to 657,900 persons. The number of persons outside the labor force increased by 20,500 to 681,900 persons relative to April 2025. Looking at GDP performance for January to June 2026. For the first 6 months of 2026, real GDP is estimated to have contracted by 3.5%. The goods producing industry declined by 6.8%, while the services industry declined by 2.4%. The industries that were estimated to have recorded the largest contractions during the first half of the year were mining and quarrying, down 23.7%, agriculture, forestry and fishing, down 17.6%, and accommodation and food service activities, down 14.4%. Looking at the short-term economic outlook, July to September 2026 and fiscal year 2026-27. Turning to the short-term economic outlook, short-term prospects for the overall economy are negative, with the economy projected to contract within the range of 0.5% to 1.5% for July to September 2026. That is, lower output is anticipated as industries continue to recover from the adverse effects of the hurricane. It is important to note, however, that as the economic recovery intensifies, the expectation is that for each subsequent quarter, the rate of contraction will be progressively smaller, ultimately returning to growth during the October to December 2026 quarter. With regard to upside potential for growth, the main supporting factors include 1, faster pace of recovery for most industries due to the gradual easing of the adverse impact of Hurricane Melissa. 2, full operationalization of the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, NARA, by the latter half of the fiscal year, which is expected to drive reconstruction efforts and further stimulate construction activity. 3, timely resolution to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. And 4, favorable weather conditions to support the recovery in agricultural output and water production. Risks to the short-term outlook include 1, weather-related shocks, largely associated with the start of the hurricane season and the impact of the Super El Nino on vulnerable industries. 2, a worsening of geopolitical tensions, which may result in further inflationary pressures on energy and other commodity prices. And 3, delays in the execution of major infrastructure projects, which would constrain the economy's medium-term growth potential. Preliminary data on the mining and quarrying industry for July 2026 indicate that alumina and crude bauxite production declined by 18.1% and 55.7% respectively. With respect to the accommodation and food service activities industry, preliminary data on airport arrivals contracted by 22.4% relative to July 2025. However, electricity consumption grew by 0.1% for July 2026. For fiscal year 2026-27, the PIOJ's projection is for real GDP growth within the range of 1% to 3%. Let me now speak to 10 years of Sustainable Development Goals implementation, reflections, acceleration, and beyond 2030. This past July, Jamaica completed its third voluntary national review, VNR, on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Previous voluntary national reviews were completed in 2018 and 2022, reflecting continuity and commitment to the process of follow-up and review in development planning. The VNR is a country-led process that assesses Jamaica's performance on the SDGs. The preparation of Jamaica's third VNR was led by the SDGs core group, comprising the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, and the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, with contributions from members of the wider National 2030 Agenda Oversight Committee and other stakeholders. The review reports on all 17 goals and 133 of the 234 unique indicators in the global framework. Comparative data up to 2024 from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network shows Jamaica on track to achieving 26% of the global targets, with limited progress on 35.6% and 38.4% worsening. With respect to the global picture, 15% of the targets tracked by UNSTAT are on track or have been met. 53% are making progress, and 32% are stagnating or regressing. 10 years into the implementation of the SDGs, Jamaica used this third VNR to discuss development issues across each goal, from modernizing social protection to multilateralism, while assessing how to accelerate the pace of progress and what lies ahead beyond 2030. The analysis was influenced heavily by Jamaica's vulnerability to exogenous shocks as a small island developing state. Consequently, progress was constrained by the recent impact of hurricanes Melissa and Beryl. The review highlighted the decline in the prevalence of poverty from 21.4% in 2015 to 7.8% in 2024, record low unemployment of 3.3% in 2025, elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV and congenital syphilis, reduction in the public debt to GDP ratio from a peak of 135.6% at the end of fiscal year 2012-13 to 62.4% at the end of fiscal year 2024-25, and an increase in marine and terrestrial protected areas and gains in forest cover. These indicators are juxtaposed by the increase in the maternal mortality ratio from 87.9 per 100,000 in 2015 to 150 per 100,000 in 2024. The 24.5% of youth not employed, nor in educational or training institutions as at July 2024, and a high level of informal employment, last measured at 510,000 persons in 2022. Progress in achieving the SDGs continues to be constrained by recurring issues related to climate change, inadequate productive capacity, and external energy shocks. However, accelerating achievement has been linked to increased emphasis on improving health and educational outcomes, community development, and revitalizing industry and innovation, with institutional strengthening critical to the process. Jamaica presented the insights of the VNR at the just concluded High-Level Political Forum, HLPF, at the United Nations headquarters in July 2026. The HLPF platform was used to advocate for middle-income countries and small island developing states. This effort was made possible through wide-ranging consultations across government, community groups, local authorities, civil society groups, private sector, and the youth. So in closing, the preliminary data presented on performance for the April to June 2026 quarter indicate that the economy continued along the recovery process, recording successively lower rates of contraction over the last 3 quarters. An assessment of the performance of the major economic variables relative to the previous quarter confirms the extent of the recovery being experienced. Following 3 consecutive quarters of quarter-over-quarter growth during the first 9 months of 2025, the economy experienced a sharp setback in the October to December 2025 quarter as Hurricane Melissa triggered a 7.3% decline in real value added relative to July to September 2025. Importantly, the latest GDP release from Statin confirms that the economy has begun to recover from the shock. The seasonally adjusted real value added for January to March 2026 increased by 3.3% compared with the October to December 2025 quarter, signaling a rebound in economic activity. The labor market data tells a similar story. In January 2026, the employed labor force fell by 23,800 persons relative to October 2025, underscoring the significant disruption caused by the hurricane. However, by April 2026, based on surveys conducted during the first week of the month, employment had risen by 29,400 persons compared with January. This brought total employment to 1,418,800 persons, surpassing the 1,413,200 employed in early October 2025, just before hurricane made landfall. Note that the labor force surveys are conducted during the first week of the review month. These outturns indicate that the economy is recovering from the adverse impact of Hurricane Melissa, with the data pointing to a progressive rebound in economic activity. The pace of recovery also reflects the resilience of Jamaica's underlying economic fundamentals despite the significant disruption caused by this one-off shock. For July to September 2026, the economy is projected to contract within the range of 0.5% to 1.5% relative to July to September 2025. However, for the full fiscal year 2026-27, economic expansion is projected within the range of 1% to 3%. Economic growth is expected to be driven by gradual recovery in all industries due to an expectation of fairly robust growth in the latter half of the fiscal year as a result of the low base effect from the Hurricane Melissa impact in the latter half of fiscal year 2025-26. This economic outlook is supported by significant upside potential, driven by strategic public investments under the government's ongoing Public Sector Investment Program, PSIP, and the initiatives being advanced by the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, NARA. With respect to the ongoing PSIP, the government's capital expenditure for the April to June 2026 quarter recorded a robust increase of 55.8%, reaching $13.7 billion. This momentum is expected to continue over the short to medium term as reconstruction activities intensify and the implementation of recovery projects accelerate. With respect to the expected recovery timeline, immediately following Hurricane Melissa, the PIOJ projected that a return to pre-Melissa levels of output would take up to 3 years, that is by fiscal year 28-29. This estimate was grounded in the patterns observed following previous weather-related and other external shocks. However, given the pace of recovery so far, the current expected timeline for attaining pre-Melissa output levels is now within 1.5 to 2 years of the event. That is as early as the April to June quarter of 2027. Note, however, that full recovery, to include rebuilding efforts and replacing housing stock, public infrastructure and livelihoods, will be over a more extended period, possibly 3 to 5 years. In closing, I want to acknowledge and thank the very dedicated team here at the PIOJ. I encourage all Jamaicans to continue to collaborate in advancing our recovery and building a stronger, more resilient Jamaica as we sustain our efforts to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. May God continue to bless Jamaica, land we love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG. Today, Dr. Henry provided preliminary estimates on the performance of the economy for the April to June period, an outlook for the upcoming period, which is September to November, July to September, and he also gave an update on Jamaica's third voluntary national review, which we refer to as the VNR. The floor is now open for questions. You can use the raise hand feature in the chat to be identified, or you may type your questions and we will take it from there. Once we have recognized you, please give your name and the organization that you are representing. I see Chevron has his hand raised in the Zoom, so you may go ahead and give your question.
Siobhan Campbell, Nationwide News. 2 questions at the outset, and then I'll leave the... Can you hear me?
No, you're very low, very, very low.
Oh.
Try again, Siobhan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better, yes.
Okay. So just 2 questions at the outset, and I'll allow others to ask theirs. The first one is regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. It doesn't seem that we will be able to meet the 2030 target under the current circumstances with just 4 years on the clock. So well, actually less than 4 years on the clock is being done behind the scenes at the level of the government to accelerate the attempt to get to those targets. And what is a realistic expectation as in an actual date when we should be able to hit those targets? Because clearly it won't be 2030. And the second question is a more general one. Does the PIOJ, as the center, the government center that does a lot of the research in terms of economic data, has it ever done any research as to the economic impact of informal settlement, if there is any?
All right, thank you very much, Siobhan. So thank you for your questions, and I'm going to ask my colleagues to join in giving responses. So your first question on SDG attainment and acceleration, and your second question on the impact of informal economy. Informal settlements
on the economy.
All right, just seeing if you were paying attention. Yes, it's informal settlements. So certainly, globally, you've heard the I wouldn't say dismal, but the concerning picture of the low rate of attainment of the global goals, SDGs, right across economies globally. So while we report that Jamaica is on track to achieving 26% of the global targets Globally, the averages countries are on track to attaining 15. So while we are above the global average, and among those countries that people look at because of the types of things happening positively, we are still concerned. And so we've done an assessment. We've done a number of assessments, and we've looked at where we highlighted here those accelerators. What are those things that we can do to help to accelerate, to speed up in the remaining years to 2030, or attaining these development standards? So I'm going to ask Carlos, our esteemed colleague here, to speak a little bit about acceleration and what we identified as those levers.
All right, thank you, DG. All right, so coming off COVID-19, we did our second voluntary national review in 2022, and at the time we had recognized that based on the effects of the pandemic, the feasibility of achieving the 2030 agenda and the SDGs was in question. After that 2022 voluntary national review, we did some studies, commission studies as well, to do an analysis on what exactly is Jamaica's feasibility of achieving 2030 agenda and the SDGs. We finished those two studies in 2024 and 2025, and we had identified that yes, we do have significant challenges, and at the time it would have been 5 years to go, can we achieve the SDGs? And the simple answer was, with the significant challenges that we have, it was not going to be possible without significant acceleration. And since then, we have been focusing a lot more on acceleration of the SDGs, so I'm glad you asked that specifically. From the analysis, we've identified 4 goals, specifically goals 3 are related to health and wellness, goals 4 on achieving quality education, goal 9, which looks at industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and goal 11, which focuses a lot more on community development and planning, which is what we mentioned just now in DG's presentation. We've recognized that with some significant emphasis being government expenditure, community support, private sector support, and essentially what we call a whole of society approach to implementation, that we can expect to see what we call multiplier effects across the goals. So again, that is to repeat, with significant emphasis, that's expenditure, whole of society approach to goals 3, 4, and then 11, we can see what we consider significant movement significant movement on the other 17 goals. So we're not necessarily throwing our hands in the air. The government of Jamaica, us here at the PIOJ, we're going to continue to do research to see how we can ramp up our implementation efforts and also look beyond 2030. The development plan does not end on December 31st, 2030. Life still goes on in Jamaica after that.
Thank you very much, Carlos. James, informal settlements?
No, we have not conducted any economic impact study on informal settlements. And there's no immediate plans to at this.
Okay, we have another question here. It's from Kellery Miles. Good morning. This is not explicitly said, but in light of 3 consecutive quarters of downturn, is the PIOJ maintaining that the Jamaican economy is not a recession? And the second question, to what extent will the current drought conditions impact outturns in the current quarter?
All right, yeah, so in the presentation by the Director General just now, he pointed to the latest release from Statin for the outturn during January to March of this year. Remember now that for a recession, what we compare is the preceding quarter's performance. And the data indicate that for the January to March period, we actually recorded a growth of 3.3% relative to October to December of 2025. So yes, we can confirm that there is not a recession. We are not in a recession, and it's not likely that we'll experience one for the remainder of this year.
Impact of drought on the current,
yes, so drought has been having an impact on several industries. Agriculture is one, the electricity and water supply is another. This is expected to continue as the El Nino phenomena is becoming more apparent. What we have seen for the current quarter in terms of the downturn though, It's a combination of factors, including the lingering effect of Hurricane Melissa, drought conditions, the geopolitical issues. So it's a combination of factors that have been influencing performance. But yes, drought condition is having an impact on our output.
And suffice to say that we are seeing targeted interventions by the ministry, by the government, in the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Fishing, to bring relief in the areas of trucking water and trying to target support to those farmers most affected by the drought conditions. So as James says, it's a wider context of factors that are impacting in terms of negatively. So while we speak to drought, you may find some alleviation coming from targeted response by the government, but it comes against a context of a wider set of concerns, the ongoing effect, as James has said, of Melissa, and then also the types of pressures coming from the crises, the geopolitical crises in both the Middle East and ongoing Ukraine conflict.
Okay, thank you. Mr. There's a question from in-house. Identify yourself and ask your question, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Luke Douglas from the Gleaner. Thank you, DG, and your team for your very comprehensive presentation. I just wanted to ask something that jumped out on me, which is the housing starts being down by 90% during the quarter. I found this interesting, even though housing completions may be up, but one would have thought that coming months after Melissa, that would have seen increases in housing starts rather than down so much. That's one question. And related to that, does the I had asked earlier in the year whether PIOJ would be doing anything on housing affordability, given the fact that it seems that there's a lot of housing developments that are taking place, but they seem to be in the upper, geared towards the upper market and out of the reach of most of the population. So that's my question.
All right, thank you for that, Luke, for those questions. In terms of the housing, while reported on for the quarter, the low starts, that was the April to June quarter, we said over the last 4 months, we said.
4 quarters.
4 quarters, you're seeing just increased activity. Significant increase activity coming in. So to answer your question, so immediately impact of Melissa, you had just quite a bit falling off in terms of the ongoing fallout or the impact, one-off impact, but then things have been picking up. And as we report going forward, we expect to see quite a bit happening. And certainly as the operations come more fully on stream in terms of reconstruction and recovery, you're going to see much more. The government has announced that housing is one of the priority sectors, as you can imagine. So we expect much more to take place there. But immediately following and those months that followed the occurrence of Melissa, that we saw that follow, but things are picking up. James?
Just to add that the figure that we reported on is only for NHD. It does not include private developers, which may be a significant component.
Yeah. We have no plans to assess any affordability in terms of any study or assessment.
No plans.
No plans. We've seen where the government has been targeting social housing and looking at some of those same issues, and for some time now has been rolling out and different social housing units, and you're seeing generally in that space. So I know that's an ongoing area of attention for the government. But we have no plans in terms of assessments in terms of affordability.
Thank you. Recognizing Chevron's hand, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Good morning again. Just a quick, direct question, really. The long-term adjustment to the growth projection from 3 years to 1.5 or two, is that inclusive of the expected economic impact from NARA, or does that preclude it?
Yes, it considers the likely impact of NARA. It does. And it's not just NARA, the government's capital expenditure, just the normal PSIP investment program, is showing some strong movements. For the April to June quarter, we saw that it increased by 55%, over 55%. So government expenditure generally is pushing the recovery. And this was factored in the considering the pace of recovery going forward.
Do you mind if I just follow that up then? Heaven forbid that for some reason.
Speak up a bit.
I say,
You fell off.
just a quick follow-up.
Yes, go ahead.
Heaven forbid that for some reason NARA does not come into effect at the expected pace. Does that mean we would have to revert back to the 3-year expectation rather than the 1.5 to 2?
Well, at this point, based on what we have seen thus far and based on what we have experienced during the last quarter, we are confident that 1.5 to 2 years should be sufficient for the recovery. And this recovery, as the presentation pointed out, is only with respect to output levels. In terms of rebuilding generally, in terms of your housing stocks, livelihoods, employment, everything, that may take a bit longer. We are thinking that will be somewhere between 3 to 5 years in terms of full recovery. But in terms of output, we're expecting that we should be able to, right, pre-Melissa output. We're expecting that we should be able to attain this within 1.5 to 2 years.
I'm sorry, just one more. It just came to me while you were giving that answer, which I'm appreciative. Under the circumstances, in terms of recovery timelines from natural disasters, thankful. I don't know what to say. I don't even think I should say thankfully, but under the current El Nino conditions, where a hurricane is far less likely, is there a concern that it takes the country a protracted period of time to recover from one natural disaster when it is possible, based on the experience from Beryl going into Melissa, that we could in fact end up in another such situation of a natural disaster before we fully recover from the one that happened before?
Yes, it's a concern and we continue to monitor it closely. But at this stage, we are anticipating recovery within 1.5 to 2 years. But your point is taken. This is barring any significant negative impact from other natural disasters which may emerge.
Okay. Luke, do you have another question?
Yes, one more.
Step back with the mic.
Yeah.
Step back.
Or speak without the mic.
I just wanted to ask about the arrivals down by 22%, and what are the prospects for recovery of visitor arrivals, and linked to that, the number of hotel rooms which will be coming on stream, having recovered from the hurricane.
Okay.
So thanks for that, Luke. And so we believe there's a direct correlation that the fall off in arrivals is due to the decreased room stock in terms of availability in terms of room capacity. And the expectation, as you've heard from the industry, is recovery and restoration going further out this calendar year with more of the properties in terms of more rooms coming on stream. And so part of the challenge we've had is just a limited number of available rooms. And I think that's the direct correlation we are seeing. But the expectation coming from the minister, coming from the industry, is that they are moving towards that gradual recovery.
Could you put a percentage on that, number on
No, we'd have to look into
When you
James.
say number, you mean timeline for recovery of the
Of the
tourism?
of tourism stock back to pre-Melissa levels.
I think based on what we have heard, sometime between the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of 2027,
27.
we should see most of the rooms start back in place.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, let me thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us and participating in today's press briefing. The presentation will be uploaded to our website and social media pages of the PIOJ and Vision 2030 Jamaica, and these are displayed on your screen. Join us again in November when we will present on the performance of the July to September 2026 period. Have a good day and stay safe as we strive to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business.
But good.
Recording stopped.
Okay.
Thank you very much. How you doing, Luke?